So good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Grisenda. I am a board member with Mass Society of Municipal Conservation Professionals. It's November 20th. Today we have a great presentation to talk about everything you need to know about the Open Space Act. In a moment, I'll introduce our speaker, Mike Gendron, who works for EEA and DCS. I'll just start, though, by talking a little bit about the Open Space Act in a very brief way, and also it used to be known as the Public Lands Preservation Act, PLPA, and maybe Mike will go through a little bit of this as well. But several board members and maybe several of you on this call have this bill near and dear to them. You know, MSMCP along with MACC and a number of nonprofits throughout Massachusetts worked tirelessly over about 20 years to see the fruition of this bill come to passage, which was a monumental feat. A good friend of mine, Paul Sanders, who was a state legislator and a Weston resident where I worked for 12 years, really pursued this early on and sadly passed away right before its passage. But it was in a good place, and many of us hold Paul Sanders near and dear for all of his tireless work on this bill and act, and we're thrilled to see that we're at this space today. A lot of us it affects because probably everyone on this call, at least if you're a municipal staff or commission member, have conservation land. And as Mike, I'm sure will share with us, a lot of this is protected under the statute called Article 97. And oftentimes there's pressure to convert this land to other things. And so this is why this topic is so important. Fortunately, in Massachusetts, this land, although it always had pretty significant protection for open space in perpetuity, there are ways in which it can be converted to other things. And but there's a very specific process that you have to go through. And so that is something that is a lot of us don't do ever. And what you do is probably sample size of one, so you have to be on a quick learning curve. Mike is aware of that, and so I think he's going to be helping us understand the basics of what's now called the Open Space Act and sort of the different tricks and tips to get us through the discussion of possible conversion, what's required if you're converting conservation land to some other use. And it should be at a very rigorous level discussed and reviewed. And sometimes it is done very well, and other times it's not. And I think a lot of times when it's not, it's just a lot of the local municipal staff might not understand the ramifications and why you have to look very carefully at this. So we're all going to learn a lot today. I will introduce our speaker, Mike Gendron. He started in environmental policy in 2016, working on Clean Water Act compliance with the U.S. Coast Guard. Mike also entered the conservation community in 2022 as he worked for the town of Acton as a conservation agent. So he has a very good sense on what a lot of us are doing on a day-to-day basis. And Mike started with the EEA in early 2024, assisting in establishing and coordinating the Open Space Act process. And I'll just mention, or maybe Mike, you can just talk about after you introduce yourself a bit more, you know, if you want people, I assume, to just write questions in the chat. And then when do you want me to, if you want to wait till after your presentation for me to interrupt with questions?
Yeah, that would be great. I think that's hopefully we'll have enough time at the end. I won't take the whole time so that we can go through as many questions as we can. But yeah, thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. And yeah, having been on the other side of these lunch and learns many times, I'm excited to be able to kind of share the stuff that we're working on here. And also, as Michelle alluded to, sometimes I do feel it a bit awkward to be talking on this topic to so many people who are very familiar with it and were, on on the ground helping to move this forward and played such a vital role well before I was involved with it. So I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize some of that great work but acknowledging that there's a lot of people on this call who have, you know, a much deeper understanding of the history of that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Great. And Mike, as you're doing that, I'm going to put in an embarrassing correction that someone thankfully corrected me on. I inadvertently called Phil Saunders a different name. So it's Phil Saunders. I think I might have called him Paul Saunders. So apologies. Just wanted to mention that. And I'm sure, Phil is up there wherever listening in. So I wanted to correct his name.
And Michelle, I'm assuming you can see the slides there.
Yes, it's
Okay.
all bit. Yep, it's a big slide.
Um, so I guess right off the bat, I kind of wanted to address something that Michelle you brought up, and this idea of the lingo of the Open Space Act, and kind of give some background on why we at EEA have been calling it that recently. Um, and again, as many as of you know, there was literally decades of push to get a um, law passed that codified some of the Article 97 policy and pushed many initiatives. When this law did pass in 2022, our office and many folks in the community continued to call it the Public Lands Preservation Act, PLPA, which it had been referred to for years and years and years. What we found out very quickly is that the law that was being pushed for some time was not the exact law that was passed in 2022. There was portions of it that did not end up in the statute, and there was some things that were added to the language. So, in order to reduce confusion and to not create any expectations of something that didn't actually end up in the law, we've been referring to it as the Open Space Act. Um, Understanding that I still call it the PLPA at times, and I know people have been calling it that for decades. It's probably hard to change that habit. But we've tried to kind of change that language on our website, and moving forward, that's likely how you'll hear at least our office referred to it, to try and clear up that the PLPA that so many people knew and loved is not the exact law that was passed. And I guess I will leave it at that for now. So with that, I think a good place to start on this presentation is talking about the three interacting components of of this world, um, starting with Article 97. So Article 97 was a constitutional amendment that was approved in 1972, and it said that the people of the Commonwealth had the right to clean air and water, freedom from excessive and unnecessary noise, and the natural and scenic and historic and aesthetic qualities of the environment. Article 97 also gave public entities the authority to hold land specifically to protect those purposes. And it said that public entities can't dispose of or change the use of those lands that were protected for those purposes without a two-thirds roll call vote from the legislature. Also, it gave the authority for the legislature to uh, pass a law that would protect this as well. Of course, that was approved in 1972, and it only took about 50 years for that law to pass. So, years later, in 1998, EEA rolled out their land disposition policy, and this did a couple things. First, it kind of set the stage for lands held by EEA and how the agency should take a stance on not pushing forward dispositions and Article 97 actions. But it also had implications for municipalities and other public agencies that held land subject to Article 97, saying that did a couple things. One, that when an Article 97 bill is pushed forward, alternatives should be explored, right? That shouldn't be the first option. These Article 97 actions shouldn't threaten unique resources. And a very key part of the policy that I'm sure everyone's familiar with is this idea of no net loss of Article 97 interest, right? Trying to keep that baseline of Article 97 land that already exists or interest in land that already exists, trying to make sure that even when bills are pushed forward, we're not losing that. So that was a policy that EEA worked under for years with a pretty good success rate. So in 2022, finally, what we're now calling the Open Space Act was passed. And this did a couple things, right? It did codify some elements of this policy, including that no net loss uh, policy, and making it so replacement land was required for these types of Article 97 actions. But it did a couple other things as well, too, right? It tried to establish a process for how these things go. When it was just operating under the policy, EEA was just kind of working with proponents to try and get the bills in compliance with its internal policy. Now this is tried to create a public process, create transparency, and involve the public in the process as well. But also, it is now requiring a written, documented alternatives analysis showing how the proponent of such action has gone through other options, held public meetings to try and find other solutions rather than disposing of Article 97 interest. And where replacement land is required, it says that appraisals need to be accompanied with the legislation as well. And finally, I think a really important part of this, and what I want to spend the next kind of segment of this presentation talking about, is it directed EEA to specifically do 5 different things, to take 5 different actions. I think upfront, it's important to acknowledge what it didn't do. It didn't give EEA enforcement authority. However, it directed EEA to essentially consult the legislature on a number of things, which we will talk about here. So here are the 5 things that the Act says: Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, you need to be reporting to the legislature on these things for Article 97 bills. And I'm going to kind of talk about each one of them on an individual basis. This is also important to kind of understanding the things that are required under the Act. So we'll go through them. So the first one is, let's talk about replacement land. So like I said, the Act codified the Article 97 policy that when you are seeking to dispose of or change the use of Article 97 land, you need to have replacement land. But it also set a criteria for what that replacement land must be. So it must be not already subject to Article 97, right? You can't offer something that's already protected as Article 97 land. It must be in a comparable location to the impacted area, and it must be equal or greater in a number of different criteria: acreage, monetary value, and the third one is natural resource value. And this is the first place where the Act directs the Secretary to act. So the Secretary of EEA must determine whether the replacement land does have equal or greater natural resource value of what was impacted. So this takes the form of a report to the legislature and to the public of the independent analysis done by EEA to determine this. And we've been using a number of tools to make this determination. An important one, and one that I really believe in, is site walks, getting out there and looking at the impacted land, looking at the replacement land, talking with the community, understanding the importance of both, but also using a number of GIS tools and biomap and things like that. And we've even developed a tool that we've been using to help kind of a quick comparison of these lands, right? To kind of give the basic background information. And this is something that is publicly available on our website, and I can show that later. But just to kind of give an idea of what we're looking at here, you can either import a shapefile or kind of draw the shape of the parcel that we're looking at, and it generates a report of a number of biomap layers, kind of community conservation layers with nearby trails, groundwater protection, all kinds of things, wildlife habitat. And the basic idea that it gives you an idea of the resources that are being lost at a quick glance, the resources that are being gained, how do those compare to each other? I do think it's important to say that this is not the end all be all, right? This is a tool to inform decision making. But this report, putting them side by side, shouldn't be enough to say, yes, of course, equal natural resource value. There can't be anything that we're missing here, right? It requires going deeper than that. But this is a tool to kind of inform that decision making and something that we'll be using as part of our reporting to the legislature moving forward. So that was the first one. The second one, and this is a key element that I think I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, and something that is new to the Open Space Act versus what the Public Lands Preservation Act is, this idea of funding in lieu. And so what does that mean? In a case where replacement land is required under the Act for an Article 97 action, if a proponent can demonstrate specific criteria are met, then in lieu of providing that replacement land, they can provide funding that will eventually go to the replacement land. And I think going a little bit deeper than that, what does that mean? I think there is a slight misconception that this is a way for proponents of Article 97 actions to basically buy out Article 97. The way that the Act reads, it is more of kind of kicking the can down the road. It gives a 3-year window. It says this money needs to be 110% of the appraised value of the impact, so more than the impacted value. It needs to be put into a segregated conservation account. So for municipalities that have CPA, this can be the open space fund of the CPA. If not, it can be another dedicated conservation account. Now, that doesn't mean that we can use this money to supplement our conservation budgets and hire new staff and things like that. It does need to go specifically to acquiring land. And that money needs to be used within 3 years of the bill passing. Another important piece of this is that doesn't mean that a town can take that money and go buy whatever land they want. It still needs to meet the criteria of that replacement that we were just talking, comparable location, not already protected by Article 97, equal or greater natural resource value. And that means that when that land is acquired eventually, a report by EEA will still be necessary determining that the project is of equal or greater natural resource value. So what is this action that I'm talking about that the secretary has asked to do here? So not anybody can just, or you're not supposed to just do an in lieu funding bill. You need to meet 4 criteria and have the secretary find that those 4 criteria are true and that a funding in lieu bill is justified. So the 4 criteria is 1, the Article 97 action serves a significant public interest. The Article 97 action will not have an adverse impact on environmental justice population. The alternatives analysis has demonstrated that there were other alternatives were sought out and were not feasible, and that alternatives analysis needs to be posted for public comment. And finally, it needs to be determined that at this point in time, it is not feasible to contemporaneously designate replacement land. So that can be, a number of different justifications, but you need to justify this is why we're not able to provide the replacement land at this time, and we're going to need that 3-year window to identify that replacement land. So the secretary will need to do an independent analysis of this and issue a report to the legislature and to the public that this funding in lieu is justified. The third action is in line with the funding in lieu provision as well, which is the Act directs the secretary to issue an annual report of all of these instances, right? So any outstanding funding in lieu bill that was passed, the secretary will be reporting to the legislature and to the public on how much money did that end up being based on the appraisal. Was the money put into a conservation account? What account was it? Has it been spent yet? What replacement land was acquired? Did it meet the replacement land criteria? All those things will be put into a report annually. That way, the public and the legislature can keep track of these things so that funding in lieu isn't issued and then we forget about it, and in 3 years replacement land hasn't been acquired. This is a way of keeping tabs on it and making sure we know what step it is along the way. Um, Practically, how that will work is, if money was put into a CPA open space account once a year, I will probably contact the agents in that town and have a conversation about where it is and ask them to kind of provide some information so that I can push up that information to the eventual report. Okay, so now we've covered the first three actions, getting to the fourth one, waivers and modifications of replacement land. So the Act directs the Secretary to consider waivers or modification from the replacement land requirements in two specific instances. So it doesn't say that the Secretary can use their discretion to issue waivers or modification for anything. It needs to meet one of two criteria. So the first one is being transfer of legal control between public entities without a change in use. So what does that mean? Say the town common was dedicated as parkland and is under the care, custody, and control of the select board. For whatever reason, the town determines that the select board doesn't have the resources to manage this park, and they want to put it under the care, custody, and control of the Parks and Rec department. That is an Article 97 action, right? It is a disposition. You're changing legal care, custody, and control of that park. However, assuming that the Parks and Rec department are not intending to change these, right? They're not changing the town common into a football field or a indoor skating rink or something like that. They're not changing the use, then that is eligible for a waiver of replacement land. So all that's saying is legislation is still required and to authorize that transfer. However, the 2-acre parcel will not need to be replaced somewhere else. We're waiving that requirement for that. An alternatives analysis is still required, right? You still need to go through the process. However, the replacement land requirements have been waived. The second instance where this is applicable is essentially a de minimis impact. So they put numbers on this, a impact of 2,500 square feet or less, and insignificant natural resource value or recreational value is impacted, and it serves a public interest. So just because it's a small area does not necessarily mean it qualifies for a waiver. In that both there it says the Secretary has discretion. I know I said that they don't have discretion on the type of waiver, but they do have discretion. The Secretary does have discretion on if a waiver should be issued or not. And by that I mean the area is not alone a criteria to get a waiver of replacement land here. So an example of this would be, on conservation land, there might be an existing access road where, maybe there's an underground utility or something like that. And the utility company needs a small easement to access and, manage that. You're within the right of way of this access road, making up the scenario, and maybe it's only a 300 square foot easement, something like that, where you're now maybe you're transferring care, custody, and control of that easement to the DPW or something like that to manage the easement. So that's the criteria for the second waiver. Now, all of these determinations, and I'll show you where they'll be posted, are going to be posted publicly on EEA's website, and including a waiver in this case. So moving on to the fifth thing that was directed, and that was for the Secretary to promulgate regulations for the Open Space Act. Now, it said 18 months. We have elapsed that 18 months, and regulations have not been issued yet. But I'm excited to say that on this Friday, the regulations are going to be posted publicly on our website. We're pushing out public notice, and that will initiate the comment period for the public. So this is an exciting kind of time to be meeting with this group, because no better way for me to push out this message that Friday be looking for these regulations, kind of a few of the key elements here, but really what these regulations are trying to do is to clear up some of the language in the Act to make the process more clear and to help people understand what some of these terms that we keep throwing out there mean. I do think that they will be really helpful to compliance of the act in the future. And I'm really looking forward to my inbox being inundated by all of you over the next month or so with your feedback and comments on those regulations. So again, this Friday, the 22nd, these regulations, the draft regulations are coming. So very exciting. Okay, so now that we've moved away from kind of the 5 actions that were pushed forward by the Act and kind of what the Act is asking EEA to do and asking proponents and public entities holding Article 97 land to do, I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we've generated in order to help compliance and help the process move forward. So instead of talking to this slide, I'm actually going to pull over our website. Michelle, can you see that?
Yep, it worked.
All right. So down here in our tools and information section, we have a number of tools that we've generated to try and assist this process. So this first one is that site evaluation tool, the natural resource determination tool. We have it linked here. We'll continue to post the legislative sessions and the bills that passed, Article 97 bills that passed in each session. We have our guidance, our frequently asked questions, all these tools, but a couple that I really want to point at. One is first this tracker. So on our website here, this is where we'll be kind of following along and posting information about ongoing legislation. Now, I do think it's important to note that what is posted on this tracker is only as good as the information that is submitted to EEA and given to EEA. And by that, I mean, it's not impossible that a bill gets filed without anybody ever talking to EEA, kind of moves through the process. So I guess that's just a reminder to say this could not be a comprehensive list, but these are the ones that have been submitted to us that we were working on, that we are making findings on. Anything that EEA is going to make a finding on, which again, in theory, should be every bill, will be posted here. The alternatives analysis, any information submitted, and the EEA responses will be over here. All right, and then another important thing here is this portal, and this is going to be something that's very important for municipalities who are going through this. So this port, whoops, that's not it. Here we go. So this is where the formal submission to EEA should take place. You can have all the information about the alternatives analysis that can be directly posted here, information about the votes, requesting for the waiver, information about the lands in question, all the information that EEA feels they need to move forward the process and to give feedback and to make findings will be located here. We are continually trying to improve this and would welcome any feedback as folks work through the process on what their experience is like with the portal, how we can make it better. One thing that I'm trying to work through right now is we have a maximum amount of files size that can be uploaded to this, which has created an issue, right? Because some people need to upload a lot of things, and that means that they need to email some to me. We can be flexible and work through that, but I'm hoping that in the future we can kind of cut down on some of the issues and make this portal as user-friendly as possible. Okay, so those are some of the tools that we've talked about. Another important thing here is this Article 97 at mass.gov. That used to be PLPA at mass.gov. We've shifted our emails for reasons that we've discussed already. So any kind of questions, concerns, the town might be thinking about a project, you have a question about or something, is protected by Article 97 or not, this is the best way to reach us here at EEA is that email address. All right. So this slide is now talking about Now that we kind of know what the act is asking of us, shown you the tools, what is the desired, most efficient way for this process to work as public entities and towns are working through this? This first box here, sorry, I know this slide can be a little bit clunky and hard to follow, but we'll talk through it. This to me is really the most important thing that I can stress is consulting with EEA as early on in the process as possible. And the reason I say that is because if any of the issues of Article 97 eligibility, about replacement land, about waiver eligibility, about the project as a whole, about the validity of the replacement land, anything, the EEA is willing to at this stage look at draft legislation and mark up draft legislation to ensure compliance with the act and with the policy. The earlier that we can get involved with this, the more efficient the process is, but in my opinion, the best conservation outcome is on the table. What happens sometimes is when a bill gets to us at the tail end of a session, and we do whatever we can to influence the bill. But without our involvement early in the process, it hurts our ability to get the best conservation outcome that we can possibly get. So this consultation is really important. Once EEA and the town are on kind of the same page and everyone understands the project and we've kind of looked at everything that we possibly can, that is the best time to submit to the portal. Now, again, understanding that this is not how it's always going to go, right? We're going to get portal submissions for projects we've never seen before, and that's okay. And we'll work through that. And but the more information that we can sort out before it gets submitted to the portal, the better. When we get that information in the portal, we will then display that information on the tracker. And as findings and things like that come out, we'll continue to update the tracker. EEA will do its review of all of the information, review the legislation. If there's any markups that we would recommend or request, that's kind of the time we would do it. This is when we're officially kind of determining the findings and the waiver eligibility and all that thing. At that point, that is the next best step is after those determinations are made, that's when the bill's filed. Because if the bill can be filed with the determinations from the secretary, with the completed alternatives analysis, with the appraisals all accompanied together, that's really the intent of the act. Again, I know that's talking in a perfect world scenario, but that is the best case scenario, that the bill is filed with all of these things accompanying it. And that's the best way to give the legislature all the information that's that we possibly can. At that point, EEA will interact with the legislature. They might have questions on the bill, and if we need to provide any additional information to them, we can. The bill is either passed or not passed. And then finally, at the end, once the bill is passed by the legislature, the secretary has an opportunity to comment on bills before it goes to the governor's desk. Again, this is the best case scenario process. In the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when that process isn't followed in a perfect world scenario. So, lessons learned from the first legislative session. Right up front, I think it's worth acknowledging that, in my opinion, the two biggest reasons that we saw issues with compliance with the act in this legislative session was, one, a lack of regulations, and that's on us. I do think that regulations will help kind of set the standard and make clear the expectations and the process that can be followed. Two is educating as many people as we can about this, right? Having these types of conversations and helping people, towns have been dealing with Article 97 actions in one way for decades, and now we're asking them to do it a different way. And that's going to take time for us to all get on the same page and kind of push out the best way forward. So with that in mind, it's important to note that 17 of the 24 Article 97 bills that were passed in this legislative session um, were not fully compliant with the Open Space Act. And by that I mean they either didn't have the replacement land up front, or didn't have an appraisal up front, or didn't have certain findings from EEA. All of those we tried to resolve as best we can. And um, if the best we can do in some cases were to influence the actual bill itself so that certain things couldn't happen later on until alternatives analysis or an appraisal or something that was produced. Um, we tried to change the language as we can to get those compliant, and at the very least to ensure compliance with the no net loss policy. So with that in mind, um, that can't really be the expectation going forward, right? We want to see that number change, and that's again the goal of all of this. And another important thing to note here is that of the 24 bills that were Article 97, 22 of them did pass and were signed by the governor. However, two were not signed by the governor, and that was due to non-compliance with the Article 97 policy. And the secretary, basically didn't give a thumbs up on those two. Returned with amendments, trying now in the next legislative session to work with those public entities to create compliance, but just to kind of give some background on that. So talked a little bit about areas to address compliance, enhanced tools and documents and graphics. As, like I said, I really encourage folks as they work through the tools that we have provided. This stuff is all new, right? We're still putting it out there and acknowledge that it could continue to be worked on. And any feedback that anybody has, we would be greatly appreciated. And another key thing to talk about here is this process does really require input and work at the local level. And a lot of times that is going to be the best place to influence these things early and often at the local level. As I've mentioned already, the Act doesn't give EEA enforcement authority under the Act. So, we have our role in this, but our role can at times be limited under law. So having input and having the conservation community really have keeping an eye on this and working at the local level is imperative to helping it push forward and to keeping and for the town staff and everything like that to understand the process and understand how it's supposed to go. As far as timeline process, we talked about the regulations. Those are coming this week. The Article 97 policy, we are working to update it, mostly to update it for two things. One is there's a lot of language in there that is just not how we talk about it anymore. Some of departments have changed names and things like that. So updating it to modernize the language of it, but also doing our best to kind of pair it with the law. One thing that I talked about at the front was Article 97, the policy and the law are kind of three parallel lines, and they're working parallel. If they were a Venn diagram, of course they overlap a lot in the middle. There's a lot of stuff that all work together, but not everything, and they do all have kind of their independent lanes. So we're trying our best to update the policy to reflect that. But I get the question, right? Does the Act supersede the policy, right? Is the policy going away now? And the answer to that is no. EEA's disposition policy remains. We're going to update it, and we're still going to operate under it, while tagging on the additional things that the Act is directing us to do. So that is coming. We're hoping to do that shortly after the regulations become final, is to push out that policy. Included here, just because the regulations are coming, a little bit about the process of how regulation promulgation works. This portion has already happened, notifying the LGAC 21 days before a public comment hearing. Oh, and I should have mentioned this. There will be a public hearing mid-December on this, where and I believe it's going to be a hybrid in person and Teams or Zoom so that we can maximize as many participants as we possibly can. So 21 days before, um, that is when that's going to happen here, all that stuff here. And then this is what's going to happen after the fact. I'm certainly no expert in regulation promulgation, but this is kind of a information graphic here. One thing I do want to leave us with here, um, and I think time will tell how important this information is, but it's certainly interesting in the moment. So 23-24 was the first legislative session that came after the act was passed. And there was an interesting trend, right? As you see, the number of bills passed, Article 97 bills passed, significantly went down. The number of acres disposed significantly went down. And the ratio of acres replaced versus acres disposed went significantly up, right? So 3 times as much Article 97 land came, or land was protected for Article 97 than was disposed of. So it's possible that that was, a fluke here, and like I said, time will tell. But the data right now shows that maybe the passage of the Open Space Act did have an impact on the number of dispositions and people's willingness to dispose land, and we hope that that trend continues, and we're going to continue to track this data and put it out. But I think it's a good place to end on this discussion, especially as I just talked about kind of our issues with compliance in this session. It wasn't all bad, right? Although we're still struggling to kind of, and we hope that in the next session it will improve. There's potential here to show that, okay, maybe this is working, and will continue to work. So with that, I will go ahead and stop talking at all of you and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. This was excellent overview and very excited to see the draft regs come out on Friday. Folks can write on the chat questions you have, and maybe Mike, you can stop sharing your screen
Oh, yeah.
just so we can see everyone. Perfect. And I'm just changing my view so that I'm seeing a gallery again. Excellent. And people can also raise their virtual hand as well. But a couple questions that came up that I want to circle back to. A good question from Peter about the appraisal question
Sure.
about funding in lieu requirement. So you had mentioned, I think, that it has to be at least 110% of the appraised value has to be the replacement. Sorry, the fee in lieu.
Yep.
Uh, and then, so the question is, if appraised, well, let me rephrase it because it's so if you appraise conservation land, like say you're taking out a 5 acre conservation land and you appraise it, it's already permanently protected, so the highest and best use is going to be a small amount of money, presumably. And so how does that relate to
Sure.
any potential land you're looking at? Sorry, how does that relate to the fee? And getting comparable land is going to cost a lot more money likely because it's not currently protected. Did that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah, it's a really good question. So, um, the way that the act is written and the way that the regs follow in suit is saying that when looking at the monetary value provision there, as determined, so we're looking at the monetary value or the value in use, whichever is greater. And that's to say that when appraisals are taken for a conservation land, like you said, where the highest and best use is conservation land, we need to talk about the value use. How is that land being proposed to be used in this case, right? So from that lens, I interpret that to mean we should be looking at the appraised value as if it's not encumbered by Article 97, and that looking at it in the lens of how the what the use will be in this case. So that does the language is there to seek to address the problem that you just mentioned, um, understanding that that can be a difficult thing to really wrap our head around, right? And because of that, we're taking a closer look at EEA's appraisal standards, and plan to issue updated appraisal standards to try and capture this idea of value in use. Because right now it's kind of a hard concept to to put a line on. And in this updated appraisal standards, we're looking at a couple things that we've identified that we really don't feel like it meshes well with the way that the act and the regs are written. And hopefully, this update will be able to kind of assist in that process and to ensure that we're doing it the right way.
Perfect. That makes that I think makes a lot of us feel better about that option because it certainly needs to you sort of need to compare apples to apples, and with
100%.
permanently protected land, we know how the value has already highest and best use value has decreased for Article 97. So Maria from Brookline had a question about, she said she heard you mention that subsurface uses do not require replacement. It is quite common to have below grade utilities such as water, sewer, drainage in parks and open space land. Will the regulations clarify what, if anything, extra needs to happen for new or replacement utilities beneath open spaces, and whether or not they would need to go through this conversion process?
Yeah, really, really good question. And that's something that we thought about a lot and did address in our regulations. And I will do my best to kind of articulate what the regulations will say about this, right? So in the replacement land section, it talks about certain easements, is the title of the section. And what it's referring to is certain temporary easements, some subsurface easements, kind of things that you're talking about here. And the idea is that if the impact is temporary in nature and that the at the end of, I forget what the time period is, the surface of the land is unimpacted, and by that I mean it's returned to its natural state, then replacement land isn't required in that instance. Now, it doesn't mean that mitigation is not required, right? First of all, it still is an Article 97 action and needs to follow the legislative process, still needs to follow the process that we discussed here today. But it gives a different option than replacement land, and that is appraising the value of the impact, right? The whatever that impact is, whether it's a temporary amount of time that the public doesn't have access to it, or whatever the subsurface impacts are, praising that value, and the value of that impact is the mitigation in this case.
Thank you.
And hopefully the regs will maybe be clearer than than my explanation.
Yes. So we've got two hands raised, and there's another question in the chat, but I'll take Dot McGlincy next.
Thanks very much. This is, I do have other questions that I'd like to ask, but I want to follow up on the subsurface question issue because so many times the subsurface requirements for the easements do not allow trees to be built there because you've got a subsurface utility. So oftentimes it'll say it's just going under the ground, and at first it sounds good, but you can't have any trees there, so it's going to be completely devoid of the habitat that might have been there. So that's one issue. And I'll just throw these others out because we're hitting the end time. The second question is your disposition policy the new name for the no net loss policy? Because the no net loss policy is talking about we don't want to lose land. So finally, I want to say thank you so much for all the work you've done, you and Kurt and everyone else. The website's great. Thank goodness we've got the tracker. You'll be getting lots of comments from us, but please know that we're really happy we've moved into this phase. Thank you very much. So
I appreciate that, Dot, and I do look forward to more comments from you and your team. Yes, both really good questions. So my interpretation of that certain easement section, because it says it talks about the land, it only applies if the land is restored and is unimpacted from what it was before, right? So to me, if we're clearing trees for this, put in underground utility lines or something like that. And then now we're maintaining that easement in a way that doesn't allow that regrowth. That is not applicable, right? That is not meeting the intent of the regulation there. So I think it's a really good point. And it, like all regulations, provides some level of ambiguity there. But that is my kind of understanding interpretation. The second piece is, yes, I refer to it as EEA's land disposition policy. So, and I should clarify that too. It, it is often referred to as the no net loss policy, and that's what it is. However, the official title of the policy is actually technically EEA's land disposition policy. In the update, we're looking to change that to make it the Article 97 policy, for the exact reason that you're pointing at, right? We do not want it to be interpreted that this is a policy on, supporting land disposition. Rather, this is a policy on addressing Article 97.
Great. Good questions and good answers. I'm going to go back to the chat and then we'll take on Pete's question. There's actually two questions that are related. And so I'll ask them in sort of order in terms of what they're addressing. So a good question was, will the regs clarify what constitutes Article 97 land?
Yeah, it will certainly seek to. However, Article 97 is not always clear and obvious what is subject to Article 97. I think we all know that, right? So I think the regulations will I think reiterate, the understanding of what Article 97 is. But with that said, I think that there's always going to be some level of kind of trying to figure it out, right? And there's using the court cases to kind of help us all understand what this means. So the answer is yes. I do think that they will try to articulate best what Article 97 is and to clarify understanding of Article 97. Will it be perfect? Will it be clear and obvious what land is subject to Article 97? I think it would be wrong to say yes to that, right?
Good. And a good follow-up to this, Leah asks, is what steps can we take to ensure our conservation lands have Article 97 protection?
Yeah, really good question. So the best way, I think, is if you are unsure and you want to ensure that your land is subject to Article 97, is to bring it to a town meeting vote or whatever your municipal authority vote is, and dedicated for that purposes, right? It's dedicated for conservation purposes only, can reference Article 97. That's in my, again, this is my personal opinion, that is the cleanest way, right? A specific dedication of land to Article 97 purposes is hard to refute. However, with that said, acknowledging that that is not always the simplest thing. If there's any questions about if a parcel in your municipality is subject to Article 97 or not, please feel free to contact EEA. I think it's always important to say that we can provide guidance on that. And however, I am not a lawyer. I can do my best to kind of walk through and take a look at everything and provide as much guidance as I can. And I'm happy to do so in those cases.
Great. And as another tip on that, some towns, sort of almost like a first step to that would be to, if you have land that you're not sure how it was voted at town meeting, it's an important step to go through your town meeting records. So if you know you have acquired a piece of property, or maybe it might be municipal land, maybe it's what you think of as conservation land, and okay, we got it in such and such 1984, go back and see how it was voted at town meeting. So certainly if it was voted in as conservation land, I think that's pretty clear. And oftentimes you can work with your town council to put a note on the deed and to sort of just re-record. That's a way to legally sort of bind it for future reference.
Yeah.
What I think Mike's referring to, of course, is if it's ambiguous and you're not sure via the town meeting vote that it was supposed to be protected in perpetuity for conservation, then certainly going to town meeting and codifying it now is always an option. There's a question about, let's see here. Kathy from Stowe says the Article 97 process has typically begun with a vote of the Conservation Commission that the land is, quote, surplus to their municipal conservation and open space needs. There has been ambiguity over the years whether the vote is a majority, a two-thirds, or unanimous vote. EOEA's 1998 policy was that it was required to be a unanimous vote. Will the regs address this issue?
Yeah, really, really good question. So the regs will not, because it is a part of the policy and not something that was pushed forward with the act. However, in our policy update, the intention is to address that because, yes, I do think it's worth noting that that is written in the policy that a majority of the conscom. However, from what I understand over the years, that is not something that EEA is not a standard that EEA has held municipalities to. So I'm unsure exactly what the final outcome will be with the policy, but I know that we've talked about that, and that's something that needs to be addressed and be made clear in the policy update.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to jump over to some virtual hands and then we'll go back to chat. So I know Pete Jackson's had his hand raised for a while. Pete, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for doing this. I look forward to the opportunity to review the regs. I hope there's an extended review period because 30 days over the holidays is not, the greatest. So hopefully that'll extend. I have a couple questions and I'll try to make them as succinct as possible. What is EEA's role in reviewing the appraisals and alternatives analysis is one. And then secondly, you've talked today about new regulations that are going to review a revised policy and revised appraisal standards. Will all three of those items be, submitted in draft form for public review?
Good questions. Yeah. So sorry, I'm trying to take notes here so I don't miss any of the questions. The first one on the 30-day comment period. I am fairly certain that the comment period is 30 days for these regulations. Acknowledging that this is an open comment period and these are brand new regulations and folks need time, please feel free to let us know if more time is needed in your comments and in the public hearing that will be in mid-December. But yes, just to double down on that, that will be the initial window is that 30 days. Second question, what is the EA's role in reviewing appraisals and alternatives analysis? So under the EEA's current policy, that is something that EEA does do and needs to make sure that to enable the process to go as smoothly as possible and to make sure that all the interests are met, those things need to be looked at, right, to make sure that things are being done the right way. However, we'll say that it's important to note that under the Act, reporting specifically on the appraisals and the alternatives analysis is not changed much from what was before, right? Because under the Act, we can only really operate under what was specifically directed of the Secretary. And I say that to mean that I kind of alluded to earlier, it's like the parallel lanes, right? EEA is still operating under its policy, and then has these additional requirements that they must fulfill to give the legislature the best possible information. So I hope that addressed the question. I'm not positive that it did, but I hope it did. And my second, or sorry, the final question there was, will there be public review of all three of the regulations, the policy, and EEA standards? Of course, the regulations, the answer to that is definitely yes. There will be an open public comment period. I am not 100% sure, and I'm happy to follow up, Pete, after the fact and try and get this information what the process is for approval of internal policies like the appraisal standards and the Article 97 policy. My hunch is that because their internal policies do not require a public input and that it's secretarial approval. But I don't want to stand to that because I just don't know that that's 100% the correct answer. So that is something I will follow up on.
May I have just a quick follow-up on the appraisal question? Um, although the act doesn't specifically, I guess, lay out requirements for you on reviewing the appraisal, do you look at it to see if it's consistent with your standards?
Yes, EEA is considering all of the information that is provided, especially the ones that are required under the law. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. We'll take Jen Carlino has her virtual hand up.
Hello. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to try to keep it really short just because I know other people have them and we're sensitive to everyone's time. Under the funding in lieu, if there's no enforcement authority, what happens to a municipality if they don't meet their 3-year time frame or they spend it on something they're not supposed to be spending it on?
Yes. Thank you, Jen. That's a very important question, right? Because the two things seem independent of each other the way that you laid them out. And I think the answer is EEA's role in that, as directed, is to inform the public and to inform the legislature on what is happening with that money. However, to your point, it doesn't tell us what to do if that 3-year period is not met or if the money is used for something else. And there's a couple things on that. The first is that I interpret the notifying the public of these things, right, and providing an annual report as, I guess, giving the municipalities and the conservation community and those impacted by it the information necessary to bring it up and to act on it. But you're right; it is at some level providing some implication that everyone is going to act appropriately, right, and do things according to the law. With that said, just because EEA doesn't have enforcement authority, that it is a law, right? And a town that acts contrary to the law is subject to lawsuit and to legal action taken against them. So there is legal teeth. Just EEA is not given the authority to do it. I hope that answers your question. And I know it's something that a lot of people are thinking about, right? Because, and I know in general, the funding in lieu portion of this is one that people have a lot of concerns about. And what I can say to kind of, I guess, address it is we understand our responsibility to be giving the information about what's happening, and we will do that. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
So who are you giving that information to? Do you notify the municipality through the town clerk and hope the clerk sends it to everyone, or do you notify municipal conservation staff?
Yep, great question. So, and I should have made this more clear earlier. All of our information will be provided on our website. So we will have a link to our annual report every year. Once a year, we'll be putting out a report of where this money is. In the cases of a town that dispose of land, they're generally they're going to be the ones who are dealing with the money and where it is and reporting to us on it. So we'll be working specifically with the town to get that information and to find out what's going on with it. But then we'll put that information report. That report will be posted on the website, given to the legislature.
Okay.
And a follow-up to Jen's question on that, or a comment would be, of course, Mike, that, MACC and MSMCP would be happy to supply links of any annual reports that you guys come up with so that
Yeah.
municipal conservation staff and commission members can be kept apprised of it as well.
That's a really great point, and I think that kind of collaboration will be really important, right? As those types of reports and things come out, working with you all to kind of make sure the information gets to the people who will do something with it.
So that meshes very nicely with my last comment. And so, thank you for mentioning how important conservation agents are. And you mentioned they are essential at the local level. I mean, we are the people on the ground. We're basically the gatekeepers. Something comes up, we're the ones saying, "Hey, that's Article 97." Everybody else in the room goes, so it would be really helpful if DCS could be more proactive in engaging us as partners in drafting these things versus just, here it is, please comment in 30 days. I think we can provide a lot of insight, and that would be really helpful to all of us if we could really collaborate a little bit more on these topics. But thank you for coming today. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. There's a few more questions in the chat. It's a little bit past 12, but we did put that we'd go till 12:30. So I think we've got some time to still answer these questions. I lost okay, here we go. Amy Green talked about on a piece of property that might be going to conservation. If there's already an unoccupied easement, would future installation of a utility be an Article 97 conversion or use?
Amy's always asking the really good questions. So let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So it's a land that's going to be acquired by the town, an existing easement, I'm assuming an easement held by a utility, is transferred with the land, and now the utility company wants to use that easement. Is that an Article 97 action? I don't know that I'm interpreting the question correctly.
Yeah, and feel free, Amy, if you want to unmute
Yeah.
yourself if you're still on. I think that's how I interpreted it too, Mike. You just have to yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was having a hard time finding myself. Yeah, that's what it is. The land will be coming with an easement on it.
Yep.
There's nothing in that easement yet, but it would be a future use.
Yeah, so I would interpret that as not an Article 97 action, Amy, because there's no disposition, right? The property interest already exists. And assuming that the intended use of that easement is, utility easement or something like that. Now, I would say if it's like a public access easement or something like that, that now we want to be using for a utility easement, now we're talking about a change in use, and that might change the conversation. But yeah, that's
great. Thanks for that, Mike. Let's see here. We have someone's just answering some questions about recording Article 97 land, which was helpful. Kathy also from Stowe supported the idea of a longer than 30-day comment period, especially over the holidays. Likely MSMCP will be formulating a request for a longer comment period as well as MACC. Also mentioned they'll likely be putting in a request to extend that comment period. So, and that's something that also, and we saw this actually with the resilience package the DEP wetland regs went through in terms of their comment period, is what they heard from a lot of people, not just the the two organizations I mentioned, but even individuals, anyone can write a comment during the comment period and say, we just need more time. And I think that is helpful when the agency hears that. So I do encourage folks to do that. We have James saying these conversions are state actions governing lands protected by the state constitution. Therefore, proponents should expect to prepare any due diligence submitted to EEA in a manner that is consistent with state standards, DCAM standards, and or EEA specifications. I think James was probably responding to a comment that was made earlier. So, James, is there anything else you wanted to add to that, or did I understand that correctly? Or Mike, for that matter?
Hello, I'm here. No, I just, this is a vote to say that the EEA specification should apply to any Article 97 disposition.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Maureen from Southbridge says, is it intentional that draft regs always seem to come out at a time of year? Holidays for multiple religions, etc., or is it the process coincidental?
Yes, no, it's a really good question. I believe the same thing happened with the wetlands regs, right?
Yeah.
The answer is coincidental, and there was a strong desire and lots of action to try and meet the 18-month deadline that the legislature imposed on us. And really, it got pushed because there was a handful of, we felt, really, really important questions that we needed to work through and to get feedback on. And we wanted to make sure that these things were in the best thing possible. Now, I also think that the further we got past that deadline, there was a stronger push from the powers that be that these things need to come out now. So there was no targeted timeline for when we did. And I will say that I mentioned the comments are coming to my personal inbox, and I will be inundated with comments. I look forward to that. And I would agree that it's not ideal that as currently constituted, that comment period would end on December 23rd, meaning that I would have a great holiday break of reviewing comments. So agreed, not ideal, but I also do think it's worth noting that these are draft regs, and to achieve the important compliance that we want, we need final regs, and the faster we can get these things to final, the faster they can start working the way that they're intended to. So leave it at that.
Awesome. If anyone, I think I got all the questions that weren't answered in the chat or the virtual hands, but if I missed one, feel free to raise your virtual hand, and we still have some time for Mike to answer those. Okay, Dot.
Hi again. Just one quick note to the people that are on this webinar. I want to have a shout out and a huge thanks to Representative Ruth Balzer, who worked on this for the same time as Phil Saunders for 25 years. She's leaving the State House in January. And as she told me, Dot, I got to get this out. We got to get this out while I'm still here. So that might have nudged it a little bit again, Mike, and Jamie Eldridge as well. So if you're in their districts, please thank them for moving this along. And a personal thank you to Mike, to Kurt Gartner, and others for moving it along. Yes, we've been trying to nudge you for the past year and a half, but we're happy it's out. And let's put the best protections for open space into this process. The whole idea was to have regulations that would have enforcement. And when we're told that there's Zippo for enforcement, doesn't make my heart go wild. It makes it sink into the Piedmont. Anyway, bottom line is we'll all be working on comments, we'll be asking for an extension for the comment period because it is over the holidays, and we look forward to making this the best protections we can have of Article 97 land, because it's so difficult to protect, and there are so many competitions for the land, whether it's for new housing or whatever. And this is going to be the foundation for how we go through the process and how we protect conservation land in the future. Thank you.
Really great summary, Dot. Thank you for mentioning that. So I think with that, I'm not seeing any other hands, and I'm not seeing any other, I think, chats. So what I'll just sort of summarize at the end then, well, thank you, Mike, for coming and giving this wonderful presentation. A lot of us are hearing this for the first time, but we know we'll be hearing more from you. We always encourage you to send more information to MACC and MSMCP. We'll be happy to get it out to our membership. And as a follow-up to this Zoom, I'll probably actually wait until after Friday when we get the draft regs, because then I can add that to our follow-up email. So probably on Monday, you'll get my follow-up email, and I think it's going to include Mike's slide presentation. Mike, if you have like probably a little handy cheat sheet of like links that are useful for people to use so they don't have to necessarily go through the slideshow, and also your contact info, I'd love to send that out. I'll send a link to the recording, and we'll obviously need everyone on the Zoom to get the word out about the comment period and the process, because a lot of times we have to be our own champions in our towns, and you're looking at the champions in our towns on this Zoom here. So it is going to be important to get the word out to as many conservationists as possible about this.
All right. Thank you all so much for having me. This is great.
Awesome. All right, Mike, we'll be in touch. Everyone have a great rest of your week. Our next MSMCP event is likely our holiday potluck in December, and we also have another a joint network Zoom with Mass ECAN and MVP coming up also in December. So hopefully you're all getting my e-blasts and seeing those. And of course, MSMCP is always welcome to hear about other potential speakers or presentations you're interested in. So don't hesitate to ever contact us with any questions or comments you have. Have a great day, everyone.